Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discoveries, our discussions, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1151. And it is a work which is described as being from the year 2019. And the filmmaker is Darius Marder. And the name of the work is Sound of Metal. This is the work which is described as being from the year 2019, and it is from the filmmaker Darius Marder and directed by Darius Marder, with the screenplay credited to Darius Marder and Abraham Marder, story by Darius Marder and Derek Cianfrance. And among its incredible cast, we have Riz Ahmed and Olivia Cook and Paul Raci and others. This is a very powerful work, which is Sound of Metal. This happens to be the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition from Criterion earlier this year. And what a release this is, and what a film this is. It's my, upon this Criterion release, this was actually my first time to be able to watch this film and become engaged with this film. And it was a very overwhelming, emotionally powerful film. I think if we were to try to focus on the plot or story structure of this film, we would be focusing in on our main characters. One of the main characters that we meet almost immediately, or indeed immediately, is the character portrayed by Riz Ahmed, who is Ruben. And we understand almost immediately that he is a musician, he is an artist, he is a drummer. In terms of the performance, the music metal performance that he and also Lou, the Olivia Cook character, are engaged with. And we also understand that they are together, they are a couple, and they are devoted to each other. They are in terms of a emotional, intimate relationship that also is very much overlapping with, or has a nice cross-section with, their love of music. And we understand that they travel together, they perform together, and they have live performances that have this incredibly intense level of music and audio power and character, and that level intensity seems to be matching the type of passion and intensity that Ruben apparently has vis-a-vis his music, and also perhaps vis-a-vis his close, intimate, personal relationships. And so in many ways, one can say, or one can recognize almost immediately, that this is a film that is about Ruben, or one of the ways to read the film is about Ruben and his relationship with the outside world. And that relationship with the outside world is expressed in his approach to music, and also in his relationship with Lou, the Olivia Cook character. Now, I think that way of framing, one of the ways of interpreting the film, and that way of framing the film is, I think, very valuable, is from my perspective, because it also leads me to understand that this relationship that Ruben has with the outside world undergoes a very seemingly sudden and quite significant change, when we understand that quite suddenly, and perhaps without warning, Ruben experiences a loss of hearing, which is a very significant and severe loss of hearing, and it is a very major change to his life and to his situation. Now, the film does follow him and follows his, say, his reactions to finding himself in this particular situation, and also his trying to deal with it or try to understand this situation that he finds himself in. We also see scenes somewhat early on consulting with medical professionals, with doctors, trying to see what his state is. And also we see too, through this process or through his trying to reckon with various, say, aspects of himself that seem to be related to or seem to be somehow augmented or otherwise come to his attention, or thus indeed to the attention of us, the viewer, and perhaps the people around him. He is also finding himself trying to deal with aspects of his own character. And we understand too that while there are a lot of we see very beneficial and very seemingly healthy aspects, say, to the relationship that Ruben has with, say, Lou, the Olivia Cook character. There are also nuances or suggestions vis-a-vis our interaction with Ruben, that maybe he does have certain aspects of his character, or indeed ways that he is dealing with, say, notions or situations that are, say, with respect to addiction, both in terms of the past and also in terms of the present, and how these two form a very integral and a very honest look and approach to Ruben's character. Now, when we have this situation that we see presented, or we have hints of, or that we get an understanding of as the viewer, when we have this situation of this character, then we also have at the same time, or perhaps intertwined with this human being, we have the situation that he finds himself in terms of his hearing, and this leads to developments of plot where he is needing to find a way to, from his personal individual vantage point, find a way to understand who he is in these situations, and trying to find some way of maybe from his perspective, maybe coming to terms with this, maybe understanding who he is as a human being, who he is as someone who has certain loves and passions and certain outlooks and thoughts and feelings about the immediate environment around him, including music and including his relationship with Lou, and how he will try, if at all successfully, how he will try to, again, come to terms with all of these elements, given the circumstances that we see him in as the film progresses throughout its various acts, throughout the running time. And so part of this journey for Ruben, we understand, is becoming engaged and becoming part of a community. And this is where the character of Paul Racy comes in, Joe, a very important character, Joe, and what he provides in terms of a place, a community. And this is a community where there are members of community who are deaf, and we see their lives and their interactions and their hopes and dreams and their daily events, and living together, and also living within the community, talking with each other, and engaging with each other, and communicating with each other. And indeed, Ruben becomes part of this. Now, Ruben, we see him again as a new member of this community. It's maybe not always the easiest type of transition, quite understandably so, because it's a new environment, a new place, a new set of circumstances. And so Ruben is found to be maybe trying to handle this type of situation to the best of his ability. And here we also have a discussion, or an exploration within the the context of these specific individuals that we have the great pleasure of meeting throughout the course of this wonderful film, Ruben, and also the people that we meet, Joe and the others in this community. We have this very philosophical and quite a powerful discussion that is occurring with regard to uh, deafness, and with regard to this this situation. And we have various nuances that emerge in terms of the regard of this situation. Is it a handicap, or is it a state of being? Is it something that is to be shunned or to be cured, or is it something that is an innate and important part of these human beings? And this is a very, I think, fundamental and quite powerfully portrayed set of thematic concern of this film that is also very relevant to the way in which the Riz Ahmed character, the Ruben character, Ruben, how he tries to come to terms with who he is as an individual, as a person, and whether he regards his condition as something that is who he is, or if it's something that is in need of a cure. And one of the very powerful aspects of this film, Sound of Metal, is that I don't think it portrays one side or the other as being right or wrong necessarily. I think it portrays it as being a very nuanced and quite complex and ultimately very powerful type of discussion and outlook in philosophy. And that outlook in philosophy leads to discussions which I think can lead to various answers or conclusions depending on who one is as an individual. And what I really admire, therefore, about the way in which this is presented in Sound of Metal is how the film never loses its sense of who these people are. And these people and their individual choices and their makeup create the wherewithal, create the basis upon which they make their choices. And Ruben is certainly in there. Ruben is this character who we understand has a lot within himself, within his own soul, that he is dealing with and reckoning with. And part of that, too, is these circumstances which he suddenly finds himself in, and what choices he tries to make in terms of what this means with regard to his relationship to music, what this means with regard to his relationship with Lou, what this means with regard to the choices that he makes in regards to how he views or how he considers being deaf, and what this means to him, and how he tries to deal with this based on what the conclusion that he seems to reach in terms of what this means to him, or how he regards this as being vis-a-vis himself. And so therefore the film becomes this journey story that is also a journey very inward. It is a story that, again, is about Ruben and his, say, relationship with the outside world on the one hand, but as we see, it becomes very inward, and becomes very, contemplative about his own soul, and is about his own philosophy. And in that way, it becomes so, it becomes like a feeling of transformation, and a feeling, therefore, of a type of spiritual discussion or conversation, or a consideration, or a type of handling of themes that is very delicate and very nuanced, but also very pointed. And one of the ways that we recognize this film being so pointed the way it is the way in which it uses style and imagery and sound upon its, say, cinema soundscape to present perspectives, both a type of subjective perspective from the point of view of Ruben, and also a type of outward perspective that seems to be showing a sense of, say, maybe a disconnect between what Ruben is perceiving versus what is on the outside world, but also where there is a presentation or this concept presented in the cinema of Sound of Metal, of this idea of disconnect, there's also room for the potential or possibility of connection. whatever that might mean in a given moment. And this is a key. This is such a key thing about Sound of Metal, I think, is the idea of how each scene seems to be dealing with or trying to, within its own terms, interpret the meaning of that word connection, that ultimately powerful and important word representing a concept of a very moving sort of human experience and what that means to the individual. And indeed, connection might mean connections with other people, or it might mean a connection with one's own heart and soul. And whatever the case may be, whatever those scenes present, whatever that language is, it is there with a sense of honesty, with a sense of cinematic heft, and with a sense of drive and purpose and delicacy that is always respecting and always searching and always asking questions and always providing a sense of room for questions and answers and contemplations and ponderings and thinking, or perhaps a sense of trying to understand oneself vis-a-vis the outside world and also vis-a-vis one's own heart. And I think that is one of the great gifts that is expressed within this wonderful film, Sound of Metal. This is such a powerful work. Again, upon the occasion of this Criterion release, I had not seen this film prior to this release, and so being able to catch up with this film and watch it a number of times upon getting this in the mail, I was so impressed with this. A very powerful and emotional work from Darius Marder and company. This is the work which is Sound of Metal. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Sound of Metal, and this is purported to be based on a 4K digital transfer. Just a word about the transfer. Again, I've taken the liberty of removing this insert, this fold-out insert from the packaging here, the plastic case, prior to the start of recording this video. So let me read from here, which says about the transfer. Sound of Metal is presented in its original aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1. This new digital transfer was created in 4K resolution on a Scanity film scanner from the 35mm Kodak 250D Vision 3 5207 and 500T Vision 3 5219 original camera negatives. The original 5.1 soundtrack was remastered from the digital master audio files. On the 4K Ultra HD disc, the feature is presented in HDR. On the Blu-ray and DVD, it is presented in high definition SDR. And so this indicates too, which is also a detail which emerges in one of the supplement discussions that we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. This also reveals the fact that this film was shot on film. And so with reference to 35mm camera negatives. And so it is a film that, as I say, I haven't seen before, so I was never able to catch up with it in terms of, say, streaming services, etc. But it does have a distinct look and feel about it that I think makes for very effective viewing experience. At least that's how I felt. Now, there's also something to be said about the way in which the soundtrack is so relevant and so important. And I was so overwhelmed by the look and aesthetic. I was also so overwhelmed by the sound and the way in which sound is employed. And this is a key, or one of the critical aspects of Sound of Metal, I think, and its overall viewing experience, the overall way in which one is able to absorb this experience. And I mean that in terms of a subjective viewpoint expression via Darius Marder's cinema, and also the way in which this is reflecting details of the outside world, and also this notion of biology and vibrations, and how this is also expressed in ways in which we see people, for example, experiencing, say, playing on a piano and putting one's hands on the surface of the piano. The suggestion being the notion of vibration, and how this is very linked to human biology in many ways. The sound of one's heartbeat, or the pulse of blood flow, or the sound of, say, blinking, or things of that, which are also details which will emerge a little bit later in this. In the supplemental discussion. So all in all, I was incredibly impressed with this presentation and style. And I must say too that I watched the 4K UHD disc, and then I watched the Blu-ray disc, and I watched them a number of times on a number of occasions, and I was impressed with both presentations. The 4K UHD offering I thought was very, very impressive, and the Blu-ray as well was very impressive. So whatever choice that you make, my dear friends, in terms of the format, if you are, if you prefer one format or the over the other, then I think you would be, I think, impressed with either format choice that you make, because overall it was a very impressive one indeed. I must say that perhaps maybe I would just personally maybe next time I watch it, if I had to choose which format, I would probably go with the 4K UHD format. But again, that's not to take anything away from the Blu-ray format. That is also quite impressive indeed. So I'm overall very impressed in terms of my own ability to be able to engage with it. And that's due to a lot of factors, one of the important factors, of course, being how it's presented here with this great Criterion release. And so now let us turn to the supplements section. So again, this is the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, which I have here on this table. And so we have two discs, one disc being the 4K UHD offering, which has the film itself. It doesn't have the supplement section. That supplement section we found on the Blu-ray disc, the second disc, the Blu-ray disc. And so what do we find when we go to that Blu-ray disc and the supplement section in the sub-menu there? So we have, first up, we have a conversation which is described as being from May 2022. And this is with Darius Marder and Derek Cianfrance. And they're sitting across from each other, and they are talking about Sound of Metal. And here they are talking about how they met, the genesis of their relationship. They're also talking about the genesis of the story structure, how certain projects that they were working on separately created maybe a foundation or backbone for the inspiration that led to the creation of the story Sound of Metal. And part of that too is also we see something of their working relationship. Also we see or we get a sense of their own personal, or elements of their own personal lives and their relationships that had some very deep influence upon the creation of this work, Sound of Metal. So, for example, director Darius Marder speaks about a relationship with Abraham Marder, his brother, and how this is reflected in a lot about this idea of in many ways, the idea of sudden change and a notion of the concept, but the idea of, and I put this in air quotes, the idea of quote unquote recovery. And I use that term very delicately here too, because another thing that emerges within this conversation is this idea that we spoke about a little bit earlier in this video discussion, which is the community. As represented by the character of Joe and others in the community, the Paul Raci character, so the deaf community, and what it means to be deaf. For example, from the character of Joe's perspective, is this something that is to be cured? Is this a disability, or is this something that is part of who he is or who they are? And this is a very important conversation or topic, and it's a very, I think, nuanced one. It's a very sensitive one as well. And Derek Cianfrance and Darius Marder, I think, both acknowledge this and recognize this, and also see how the film or the story does embody the complexities of this based on, say, individual choices. And this is embodied, I think, so powerfully in Ruben's story, in the Riz Ahmed character story itself, and how he relates to, say, Joe, and how he relates to Lou and others. And so, and it's again, it's about choice. It's this idea of choice and perception, and about and how that also has to do so closely with who Ruben is as a person, where he came from, and what aspects of his life came about in his past that inform who he is to us and also to himself in the present. So this is part of the conversation between the two of them here. And it's a very astute one. It's one that's made very sensitively and also very richly. So, and we see this reflected in the film itself, of course. So, well done. I think it's, and they also take the opportunity to speak about this film in as a type of spiritual discussion or conversation, and this idea of how expression and how communication become very important. And this also gives the opportunity for Darius Marder to speak about, say, the choice of casting, Riz Ahmed, and the preparation that Riz Ahmed made for his incredible performance as Reuben, and how certain choices of the cinematic style of Sound of Metal went to inform a lot of the aspects of this wonderful performance by Riz Ahmed. There's a similar aspect is being discussed with the wonderful performance of the character Lou. This is by Olivia Cooke, and the various choices that she makes in terms of the how this is a story too, which is about Lou and about who she is and the various choices that she makes, and also certain issues or struggles that can be said to be part of her past, and how she, in a way, is trying to, or perhaps trying to avoid, again, depending on how one interprets and absorbs her own story, how she is, let's say, trying to deal with certain aspects of her own past and her own the word that is used by Derek Sanfrance and Darius Marder, and towards the latter half of this conversation, they use the word trauma, or they use the word recovery. And again, I think those can be used in quotes, because one of the aspects of the film is how this is interpreted, or what the notion of the way in which the characters see themselves, how that leads to whether or not people see their situations as having to do with recovery or trauma, or do they see their situations as having to do with who they are as individuals, and as something to maybe in some ways to embrace, because it is part of who they are in terms of their human soul and the human fabric, as it were. So I think, and that nuance and that sensitivity is also reflected in the way Derek Cianfrance and Darius Marder do talk about it, in the context of the great performances by Riz Ahmed and also Olivia Cooke, and also Paul Raci as well. They mentioned too about his background, and how his background really informs a lot of the choices that he makes in his performance as Joe. It is one of the key roles. And Darius Marder does talk too about some of the choices, or some of the things that he had to try to deal with in terms of what the casting possibilities might have been for that role, and then ultimately how it was handled so well by Paul Raci, and indeed how some of his own biographical details emerge within the scope of his performance, and the details that emerge. I don't want to go into too much detail here, because I don't want to spoil this conversation for you, but there are some details that Darius Marder refers to with respect to Paul Raci's performance that are so moving, and that have a lot to do with Paul Raci's own life and his own background. So really quite a brilliant performance, and I'm so glad they highlighted here, the two of them here. And also they talk too about the meaning of the phrase "sound of metal," or Darius Marder does talk about this, and about the structure of the film. And this brings up an interesting point too, which is the structure of the film, and the way that Darius Marder does describe it here, seems to be linked to, or actually another way, when you check out the Criterion collection release here, go to the chapters section of the submenu and see how many chapters there are, and see how they're arranged and how they're titled. It's a very interesting parallel between how many chapters there are and how Darius Marder describes the structure of the film from his vantage point. Very fascinating indeed. I should also point out that this supplement, as well as the other supplements where we have discussions here, there's also the option of subtitles, should you choose to have that selection. So. And then also another detail that emerges in discussion here is how the working with children is a very important aspect of the film, and Ruben's character's arc, and also how this is somehow linked, as Darius Marder describes it himself, to Darius Marder's own life and his own biographical background. So very interesting, and very thoughtful discussion between these two gentlemen. Again, Darius Marder and Derek Sanfrance and The Sound of Metal from 2022, approximately 29 minutes. And that's not all, because then we have another discussion about sound design, and this is also described as being from the year 2022. And we have Darius Marder again speaking, but also in another discussion, which then we have edited together. We have Nicolas Becker, sound designer, and this is a supplement which is totaling approximately 25 minutes. And so we have here a discussion on the sound, the soundscape, the audio landscape of this film, Sound of Metal. And this is one of the very artistically and thematically important parts of this film, and one of the ways in which I think viewers respond to this film in terms of the soundscape. And there's so many details that emerge in these discussions that make for very fascinating and engaging outlooks on this work, Sound of Metal. So, for example, they speak here about how it's described, what is it, the specificity of sound. And this leads to this notion of the biological connections in terms of the perceptions of what one might call sound, which ultimately comes down to, as Darius Marder reminds us, ultimately comes down to vibrations, how the human body perceives vibrations, and how those vibrations are thus interpreted, or they are read, or they are perceived as being, say, sounds. But when we have the context of say, Reuben and how he is experiencing the outside world, a lot of this has to do with biology and the sounds of the human body, or the perception of sound of the human body, or the vibrations of the human body, and thus the vibrations of things around us. And this idea, therefore, of vibrations and biology is so inherent in the way in which the soundscape is developed for this work, Sound of Metal. And Nicolas Becker also makes this point very thoroughly and very convincingly. And this also has to do with the Foley artist sound recording. This also had to do with, they mentioned how Nicolas Becker visited the locate or the shooting on occasion to then record actual sounds of that the human body, that Riz Ahmed's body was making, sounds of blinking, sounds of, say, his heartbeat, his actual heartbeat, the blood flow, etc., in order to thus try to capture this idea of vibrations and biology, and how this then becomes so inherent to the story and the character arc of Reuben as we see him and as we meet him from the beginning to the middle to the end of this film. So, wow. And then Nicolas Becker then speaks to about how to capture sound and how to capture this idea of using different microphones as an example. Also, too, there's a way in which the film does deal with, and I don't want to go into too many details here about the specific plot points, again, for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this wonderful film, but there are ways too in which the idea of the soundscape does take on a certain dimension as the plot develops in certain directions, let me put it that way. And so this also becomes very, very important and very integral to the whole notion of the soundscape as captured in this the cinematic philosophy of Darius Marder and Nicolas Becker and others. So, and also too, they mention how the editing structure was very much keyed into the sound design as well, and so and also to points of pitch and frequency and low frequencies, and how this is also very integral to the way in which things are perceived. And it's all about perception. One of the key aspects of this film, Sound of Metal, is perception, and how that perception is registered becomes a critical philosophical point that is then reflected in the construction of the soundscape, which is, again, brilliantly conceived. And so we have these and other points brought up in this brilliant conversation, or these conversations from these two that are edited together. Again, sound design with discussions from Darius Marder and Nicolas Becker, approximately 25 minutes. Please check this out if you haven't already. It's really very enlightening. It's also subtitled, or optional subtitles as well. Next up in the supplements, we have a music video, which is the song Green, and this is the song from Ibrahim Marder. Very important in terms of the context of the film, the thematic a concern of the film, and how the song is employed. So we have the song, which is also, we understand, having this music video here, which is made up of a number of how Darius Marder describes as being footage that was ultimately left out of the film, but now we have a way of revisiting this, say, extended or deleted footage. So in many ways, this music video serves as a deleted footage reel, its own little supplement, as well as expressing this really lovely song, so very powerful and resonant. And it's a lovely and emotional experience. So I'm so glad it's included here. And also there are subtitles included as well as an introduction, approximately 2 minutes, by Darius Marder himself talking about these aspects. So the music video component, green, which has the introduction and then the music video itself. So please check this out if you can. It's really quite lovely. And then the supplements continue on with the behind the scenes featurette. Approximately 14 minutes. This seems to be something that was created in 2020 Amazon Studios, and it looks like it looks like it has the design of being one of these for your consideration, art awards contender type of promotional vignettes or promotional featurettes, as well as being a making of featurette. It is also optional subtitles, and we have discussions from Riz Ahmed, discussions from Olivia Cook, discussions from Darius Marder and others about the characters, about the characterizations, about the circumstances involving how Riz Ahmed became involved in his preparation for the role of Reuben, and about what Darius Marder describes as being the ambitious sound design, etc. So this is, I think, a very nice featurette. It does have that promotional material quality about it, but there's nothing inherently wrong with that, of course, so it's nice to have it included here. So this is the behind-the-scenes featurette from 2020. And then the supplements then conclude with the inclusion of a trailer, so please check that out if you can as well. So this is the supplements section. It might seem to some to be maybe one might feel, oh, it might have been interesting if Criterion had attempted to include some more supplements to this. Maybe it would have been interesting if it could have been possible to include, say, a commentary track or something of the sort of that. I certainly would have loved to have seen more and to have to experienced more in terms of supplements. But be that as it may, that's not to take anything away from what is currently included. I'm very impressed. I love the nuance and the depth and the sensitivity of the Derek Cianfrance and Darius Marder conversation, also the conversation with Nicolas Becker and the director, etc. So well done for being able to include this, as well as the music video as well. So very moving, very challenging, and very thought-provoking content indeed included in these supplements. And so now let us turn to the actual packaging itself. And so we have this 4K UHD presentation, or I'm sorry, 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. Again, it's in this plastic casing, and so what we have is the 2-disc layering method, I suppose. They don't seem to touch each other in terms of the surface touch, so I don't think there's any need to worry about that. There's the 2 discs, of course, the 4K UHD disc and then the Blu-ray disc, as we mentioned earlier. I've already taken the liberty of removing the fold-out insert prior to the start of this video, but I just want to point out to the very compelling artwork here. It's a very compelling image indeed, and so we have the art here. Art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman designer William Labori. In this theme, let's see here, just continuing on in terms of the use of the font on the front cover and then on the back, and of course we have the continuation of this this aesthetic presentation in terms of how certain images of the film are then integrated into this aesthetic scheme throughout, say, this fold out. So I'm very, very impressed with this very compelling cover art design. Now, I'm not, as I've said many times before, and I'll say it again, I'm not a fan of the fold out leaflet design. I wish Criterion could have the staple booklet for every one of its releases, so you could have as robust and you could have a robust and type of substantial feel with lots of pages and a lot of room for potential writings, etc. So I always say that, but I also say too that the essays are top notch, top quality, and the essay here by Roxana Hadadi, which is called "Throbbing Eternity." This is another brilliant essay, and there is a sense of directness and sensitivity and a real command over the material that is so impressive. And so Throbbing Eternity, I strongly recommend this essay if you can. So once again, like with any other essay, my strong recommendation would be, please watch the film first. And then after you've seen the film, you can read the essay, the Roxana Hadadi essay, Throbbing Eternity. Wonderful, very, very thought-provoking, so please check that out if you can as well. So with that, my friends, this is a sort of brief overview, I suppose, of or my feelings or comments about my engagement with this work, Sound of Metal, via this new Criterion release. Once again, let me say, I guess in conclusion, that this was my first time to be able to watch this film upon the occasion of this Criterion release, and I was floored. I was thoroughly moved, and it commanded my attention in a way that was very compelling. Excuse me. I felt like it was a journey, and it was also an exploration, and it was done in a way that was very thoughtful and also very effective in terms of the cinematic style, and also always having a sense of who these people were, these characters were, these human beings, who they were, and their own stories, and whatever choices they make based on those stories. And that is certainly the case for the characters that we meet, Lou, and of course Ruben and others, Joe and others. So what a powerful film indeed, and I'm so glad to be able to have caught up with this at long last. This is the work which is Sound of Metal. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.